Welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. I'm Roshan Cariappa. The Olas and Swiggys of the world have completely revolutionized consumer experience, but banking applications are yet to catch up on that front. My guest today is Ankur Joshi, who is the founder and CEO of Nuclei that strives to deliver this consumer tech DNA to banks. Ankur has had an interesting journey thus far. He has been an investment banker, restaurateur, pharma entrepreneur, and in this current avatar as a fintech entrepreneur, he's working with banks across India, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. We centered our discussion around the various nuances of building and selling to banks, and of course, the related nuances of running a startup. This was an interesting conversation, and I certainly enjoyed it, as I'm sure you will too. So let's jump into this episode of the Startup Operator with Ankur Joshi of Nuclei. Hey Ankur, welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Of course, man. Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
So Ankur, you've had a fascinating ride so far, right? I mean, it's very diverse experience from what I can see. You've inhabited various worlds, right? From investment banking to the food business, restaurant business, to building a pharma marketplace, to now being a fintech entrepreneur with Nuclei, right? So I wonder if you can take us through your decision making. What are some principles you use to decide if something is worth committing to or not?
Actually, very deep question. And the answer to this has obviously changed over the years on the basis of my own experience, the mistakes that we made. But today, having gone through a lot of ups and downs and having committed a lot of mistakes, some of the things which we learned were very, in hindsight, they seem very obvious. But it took me some time to learn those things. And one of that was just being honest with myself. That was something which I was not doing. And that also was forcing me to not be honest with a lot of other people, including my co-founders, right? And when I talk about this honesty, I'm not talking about it's very, very simple things that I do. 10 years back, I did not want to confront my co-founders because I was valuing the friendship over the honesty which was required to run the business, right? So these small things, compounded, and that stress, just went through the roof. That learning was very crucial in terms of how I have grown and how we have built Nuclei. So at Nuclei, we encourage, and I'm not saying we are 100% there, but at least initial people who started Nuclei, this clarity was there that we are not going to hide in terms of our frustrations or stresses from each other. So if there is anything which we don't like about the other, we are going to bring it out in the open and we are going to openly discuss it so that there is no long-term stress which gets built up, right? And these small stresses, if you think about a material, right? So all the stress points, they add up and then eventually the material fails. And that's true for every relationship as well. That was one key learning which I had from my restaurant days, right? So the other thing was, till date, we have always been thinking small, if I may put it like that. So the restaurant business, we were dreaming of building a McDonald's, but that was only a dream. In action, we were not doing anything, remotely, possible to reach that level. We were only thinking very, very small. We were not thinking big. Even with the pharma business, I was thinking small. This time around, we were very clear that we have to build something which is slightly larger, more diverse, more hedged, and, therefore global in nature. And that drove a lot of decision making. That one single thing drove a lot of decisions, which resulted in what we are building, how we are building it. Building global required us to think about industries which can grow globally in a homogeneous way. We were also sure that we don't want to raise money. We want to build a sustainable business, and only then take money to expand the business or grow the business. But initially, we did not want to raise funds. We wanted to see if this idea works or not, if there is product market fit or not. So that also drove our decision in terms of not building a B2C business, but a B2B, maybe a B2B2C business or a B2B2B business, right? So our distribution channel was going to be B2B. And then we thought about industries which were horizontal and which were homogeneous across the globe. And then industries like banks or telecom or insurance, those were the industries we were thinking about. Those were the industries we approached and then built up products for them, right? So the idea was very clear that we wanted to think big. We wanted to grow globally. We wanted to hedge our way or diversify across multiple economies and not just focus on a single economy. And then also diversify across multiple industries. Therefore, building something big, building something more sustainable, and building something which is more diverse and therefore automatically becomes sustainable. So again, there are a lot more, guidelines, or you can call them thumb rules, which we followed, and some were very strategic. For example, diversifying across industries. Some were very tactical, like build a product which targets customers or clients' revenue. Don't build a product which reduces their cost, because it is much easier to sell something which helps them grow their revenue, grow their business, rather than it becomes 10x more difficult to sell something which reduces their cost. So all those like smaller aspects which were tactical in nature were also there. But broadly, these were the 2-3 guidelines which we followed. And obviously, on the basis of the learnings which we have had. Yeah.
Awesome. That's like a very good opening for me to delve into plenty of these aspects, right? And I think one thing that you brought up is super important, which is the whole be true to yourself aspect, right? I think Richard Feynman said it, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool, right? And oftentimes, founders shy away from having these difficult conversations with each other. But that really builds up, right? That frustration really builds up, because when you're building a startup, you're working with these people almost 24/7, very confined setting, and you run into each other, countless times a day, and you have to build this amazing thing, which is super stressful as well, right? So, and the aspect of marrying hustle to vision, right? And truly thinking big that you spoke about. You mentioned a few of the choices that it translated into, right? In terms of, what market you pick, what kind of business model, and so on. Can you just dive little deeper in that and explain today, like, what Nuclei does, right? What are the aspects of thinking big and building sustainably translate into everyday choices at Nuclei?
Absolutely. So I'll probably go 3 years back and then,
Sure.
tell you a bit of a background as well. So when we were starting Nuclei, we decided that we'll not raise funds, right? So to remain sustainable, we had to, start generating revenue as soon as possible. And as I told you earlier, we were thinking about banking, telcos, and insurance as industries we were going to target. So we went around across Middle East, South Asia, as well as Southeast Asia. Met a lot of bankers, telcos, and insurance. And this was like literally going and sitting in Jakarta, pinging people for meetings, and probably getting one meeting out of 10 attempts, right? Probably even more, right? So you're continuously chasing people to give you a meeting. You go to a meeting, probably tell them what your idea of building a business is, and this is when no one knows what Nuclei is. In fact, Nuclei was not even registered then. So there was nothing called Nuclei. You're just going there. Someone who has not been in that country ever before, they did not know us. They were just, trying to explore that. Okay, fine. You might have certain new ideas we want to discuss with you. And therefore, how can we help you? A lot of times we got rebuffed. There was not much interest in the first initial idea which we were trying to build out, right? But then we picked up items from different banks, from different bankers, from different telcos in terms of what are the problems that they are facing and how can we help them. And that's when we decided that, from a digital store or digital layer perspective, interface perspective, there are things which get built on top of banks' own APIs. And then there are things which get built up on top of third-party APIs. And that's something which we saw that a lot of banks, and I'm specifically talking about banks because I'll come back to that later. They struggle with integrating these third-party APIs, then creating the front-end customer experience, and therefore delivering a service or a product to their customers. And that was something which we thought this is where we can add value. We can integrate the APIs, bundle all of those categories together, and deliver a standardized product to all the banks across geographies. Why we chose banks was very simple. They were the only ones who were ready to pay us upfront money so that, we can pay salaries or, sustainably run the business. So that's something which we started doing that. And we have been then only targeting banks. And now we are in the process after 3 years, nearly 3 years, into diversifying across maybe telcos and going and pitching to them multiple products. Generally speaking, it has been a journey where we have built along with the banks. A lot of banks have come back to us and advised that this is a merchant or this is an API which you should integrate and build a category for. Then we went ahead and built that category and delivered that product to them. A lot of these sales have taken, generally the sales cycle in enterprise is fairly long, and it becomes longer when again no one knows you, right? So then bringing in external credibility via, say, a partnership with MasterCard or partnership with a Microsoft, that obviously helps. And that's what we ended up doing in the first year or so, that we partnered with MasterCard, went through the Start Path program. That lent us some credibility. At least, banks started knowing us that, okay, you're part of that program. So there is some credibility associated. And that also helped in, selling to a lot of banks.
So the promise of Nuclei is to deliver consumer tech DNA to banks, right?
Correct.
What does it mean?
If you look at today's customer and when they interact with a lot of tech companies or their apps, whether it is say a Paytm or a PhonePe or a WeChat or an Amazon or a Careem or Uber, the experience is very, very seamless. At the same time, if you look at all the banking apps, the experience is nowhere near that
Dreadful.
level, right? And that's where we thought that if this gap, continues to remain this big over years, then essentially the banks will get disintermediated. These companies will have enough distribution and trust built up in 5 to 10 years, and then they will start offering financial services. And in which case, banks will essentially just remain pipes, right? That is now turning out to be true. Why? Because if you look at all the companies, all the big tech companies offering financial service, whether it is Google or Facebook or Paytm or PhonePe, right? So all of them are now offering financial services. All of them want to engage with their customers across the complete spectrum. Banks needed to bridge this gap, and that's where we thought that we could help the banks deliver an experience which is at par with the various tech companies and therefore the consumer tech DNA, which we deliver to banks. So one of the products which we started with was going to partially have an impact. We always were clear that we will also diversify along with the industry and geographies, also diversify across products. So that has also grown over a period of time. We started with a marketplace. Now we have a subscription product. We have a card stack product. We are now building a couple of more products, which will again help the banks engage with their customers better and deliver that consumer tech DNA to them, have a seamless experience across multiple aspects. So whether it is on their B2B side, engaging with banks' own merchants and their merchant acquiring team, or having an interface with the customers and enabling them to have an enriched experience on the banking app.
So if I understand correctly, like the banking layer for merchants and then the product and service layer for banks, basically, right? So
correct.
Right. So what are some common use cases that you see?
So I'll describe a new product which we have built. We're calling it Arise. Essentially, think of Costco in US. What it does, it charges you a commission and then a variety of physical products which come to you at a discounted price, right? If you look at their business model, their renewal rate is probably 97, 98%. For a subscription with the 97, 98% renewal rates, that is insane rate, right? Like even Netflix will not have that higher rate. So Costco's business model has been the same for decades. We thought about why, like this is a service which is there for physical goods. Why can't we build something which is similar, but for digital goods, right? So you do a lot of transactions digitally. Can we bundle all of them together and create a digital Costco for you where you pay a single commission or single membership fee and then get all these digital services, whether it is, your flight booking, your software purchases, your online purchases, e-commerce purchases, or your utility payments, even your, local food ordering or cab booking services, right? All of these now come at a discounted rate to you. So that's a product which we have now built. We are delivering it to a bank in Middle East. And now that's the same product which we are now expanding across telcos in other markets. So that's one of the products which we have built. There are a couple of others which are in pipeline.
So I want to go back to something you said, building with the customer, right? And I've heard you say that, you can sell a product, you can sell a service, or you can sell a vision to your customers. And you chose to sell that vision, right? I mean, you went into these conversations with no product in mind, but really like what the future could look like and how you can enable it, right? Seems amazing on plan, right? But how does it actually translate into, if founders are listening to it, how should they go about doing this, building with the customer?
So two aspects to it. So one is building with the customer. The second is, how do you sell? Selling, like there's quite honestly three things which you can sell. Either you can sell your time, or you can spend your time, build a product and then sell that product, or you can sell a vision and then, build the product along the way. Selling time is linear growth. You will at some point of time, be constrained. Selling a product, if it's a very niche product, it's nice, the ROI is higher, but over a period of time, every product becomes a commodity. Selling a vision is then something entirely different. Why? Because you're selling a dream, you're building someone else's dream, and then hoping that, it scales up. Now, if the stars align and if you're lucky, and of course, like luck plays a big role, and you're in the right place at the right time, in the right industry, with the right team, So a lot of things need to align, right? Then you can scale up, you can sell that dream across multiple geographies, across multiple industries, and build up nice product where the ROI is very, very high. So essentially create value, not just for yourself, but also for your clients at the same time, and create a value which is, exponentially more than what you would create by selling the product, right? So that's what we ended up doing. Now, selling to a client a vision, the first thing which you need to sell is quite honestly yourself. They need to trust you. So that trust needs to be built up very, very fast. And it is not an organization. So it's not Nuclei selling to a bank, right? It's always a person selling to another person. So that trust needs to get built up, and that trust needs to be repaid and maintained throughout the journey, right? Once that is built up, then you can talk about what are the problems that they are facing, how can you help, what is your strength, and you have to be honest about your strength. I would avoid overselling items. I would avoid overselling things to people. You have to be honest about what your strengths are, what you're not good at, right? So there are quite a few things, quite a few products which we have not built, but we incorporate in our products, and we go to the client along with those names of those startups, that this is something which we will purchase from this startup, and plug it into our product and then give it to you. So we need to know what we are good at, and there's again no point in reinventing the wheel also across a lot of products. It's easier to integrate those products and deliver a solution to your customers. So it's not easy. It takes a long time. The sales cycle, specifically when you are selling a vision, easily takes a year. The strength is in persisting through that year. A lot of times I also get this question that how do you sell to a bank? It just takes a long time, and startups don't have that patience, right? A lot of times I get this question that how are you patient enough across so many conversations over such a long period of time, and where you're not even sure that the sale will happen or not. There's a very good chance that it might not happen. Again, it's a matter of persevering through it, internalizing the fact that a no is not never, it's just not now, right? So if you are sure about the problem which you are solving, at some point of time, like every bank is on a different journey as well, right? So at some point of time, they will realize that this is a problem that they need to solve. And it's not that whatever problem you're solving, that is the most important problem with the bank, which the banker is solving. So they will have a list of their own problems which they're solving. So you have to appreciate that as well. And then accordingly, continue the communication channels. Our longest sales cycle with the bank was nearly 2 years, but we persisted through it, right? So we can, in between, I think 3 people at the bank changed. So we had to again start from the scratch, describe the product which we are building. But eventually we converted the account. So that's what is required. You have to persevere. You have to, again, luck definitely plays a role, but you have to believe in yourself and continue to communicate with them, explain to them, and hope that yes, ultimately something will happen.
Oh, that's amazing, right? So, you can paint a compelling vision to your enterprise client, right? But then getting them to deploy soon enough and getting them to move on something that may not be imminent, urgent, business as usual, that's usually a challenge, right? Which is why we see the long sales cycle as well. Anything that has worked for you in terms of, getting people to adopt solutions very quickly? Like, have you gone and sold them like a point solution, or, how do you choose the stakeholder that you sell to, so on and so forth?
Choosing the stakeholders also, it's very easy to say that go top down, right? It's very easy to say, but very, very difficult to execute. When no one knows you, it's very difficult to go top down. I mean, you can get lucky a few times, but it's not scalable, right? This also gets built over a period of time. So as I said, like we have invested in a lot of these relationships, which are strategic in nature, right? So whether it is a MasterCard or whether it is a Microsoft, we leverage those relationships when we are confident that we can deliver value to a particular client. And then these organizations also believe that, yes, we can deliver that value. And therefore, then we go top down. And that's where decisions get taken faster. Because if you don't go to people who are going to take the actual decisions, then it will, it's a cycle. It will go through various hoops. And then eventually you'll reach a person who is going to take a decision. But as I said, like we also need to appreciate as startup operators that we are in a lot of hurry, right? We are chasing growth. We want to execute tomorrow. We want to execute everything in this month. We want to sign up 10 banks in 3 weeks, etc., etc. But at the same time, you also need to appreciate that they are big organizations and they have their own challenges and they have their own priorities. And once we understand those priorities, then we appreciate it more why it takes them so much time. It's not easy for a bank to take a decision after one meeting and then execute. There are processes in place, and they are in place for a reason, not without a reason. So they are, and I've seen, I have myself cribbed about a lot of banking processes in the past, but it took me some while to understand why those processes are important. And once I understood them, then I realized that yes, if I also have to build a big business, I need to respect these processes and eventually also build some of these processes within Nuclei. So as startups, we need to appreciate that and give due time required on the bank side to take that decision. Sometimes it varies from bank to bank because they are also on different paths. They are also on a different journey individually. Some banks take very fast decisions. Some banks take some time to take that decision. But ultimately, if you're building a business for the long run, if you have a 10 years horizon, then how does it matter if one client converts in first year, the other client converts in third year, the other third client converts in fifth year, right? It does not really matter. To make sure that you're growing at a fast pace, just have a wide top of the funnel. That's it. So wider the top of the funnel, the faster the conversion, or actually the number of customers who will convert will be higher. That's it.
Right. And also price your solution in a way that merits that gestation period, right, for the sales cycle itself.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's spot on, right? I mean, as startup folks, I mean, we are very innovation driven. We see something cool, we see something obviously innovative, and we like quickly adopt it, right? Because for us, I mean, it's a matter of a few clicks and hey, we have nothing to lose, right? But then for banks, right, trust is such a huge issue. And at the end of the day, when you're selling to a bank, I mean, you're really selling to one person within that bank, right? I mean, you're not selling to an institution. So you have to really empathize with that person's life and what he or she wants to do, right? So yeah, great point. On that note, what are some nuances that people should know about selling and building for banks?
One thing which again I think a bit harsh from a lot of startups and from a lot of external organizations towards bank is that the IT team or the tech team of the bank takes a lot of time. But having seen the tech teams across banks, right, and having seen the challenges that they have to face, not just externally, but also internally and from the regulator and the pressure they are under, now I empathize with them a lot more, right? So a lot of times we feel that we could have done certain integrations faster if these or one or the other thing could have been done. But now knowing the kind of pressure a lot of tech teams at the banks are under, and they have to follow a lot of requirements from the regulators as well as internal operations which are required in a certain way. It takes them genuinely a good amount of time to cover all of those aspects. It is important for them to take it or build it in a way so that there are no long-term repercussions. So I'm not saying they can't improve. I'm just saying that, people can have more empathy with them. Seen a lot of heartburn across multiple companies that, that's taking more time, etc., etc. But again, definitely it can be improved, but it's also for good reason. And a lot of times we don't have complete picture of it, and that's why we are unable to empathize with it.
Right. Just the mandate for IT teams, it's so broad, right? I mean, it just boggles my mind. I mean, everything from infra and security to hardware and PCs and software and whatnot, right? And just keeping on track of all of these things. And also it's a very thankless job, right? I mean, if your systems are down for a day, you're screwed. Right. I mean, and that's your first priority, first order of business, to keep things running, to keep the lights on, right? And then, all of the innovation and stuff. One of the unique things of running a SaaS business, especially when you are selling to a particular industry, is the fact that you need to have domain knowledge and you need to sort of verticalize, right? In order for you to be really relevant to your end customer. You have had a stint in investment banking, but I wonder, how are you building that within your team, right? All of this vertical knowledge and stuff. How do you give context to your team in terms of how banks operate and what they're building for, what is the outcome of the code they write, etc.?
That's not just my job, that is the team's job to do, right? So we are very, very constantly pushing the team and very, very focused on self-learning. So it's not that people need to learn about banks by doing a degree or doing certain courses, right? It's all about self-learning. And that's when you realize, that's when you are curious about how something works, that's when you realize and go after it and find the real reason and understand the basics of it, right? So cliched word, but thinking from first principle, right? So understanding how a bank works, how they make money, why having a digital front is important for them, why having a digital interface is important for them. Listening and reading through a lot of different opinions, and then, coming up with our own opinion about how a certain thing should work from a bank's perspective or for a bank's customer is something which internally we do across the board. So it's not just my job or the founder's job or the product team's job. It is everyone's job, including the tech team or the sales or finance, everyone, right? So that's when we will understand how our clients are working, and only then we will be able to empathize with them. So very simple thing like the reconciliation team of a bank, right? Again, one of those thankless jobs where if you do something wrong, everyone goes after you. But on a daily basis, when you're doing something which is so complex, but no one really worries about it. When our finance team is now interacting with the reconciliation teams of so many banks, they can now empathize with them that how difficult their job is. And if they don't empathize with them, there won't be a relationship, right? So it won't be a working relationship. So it is important for them to understand how a bank's recon works, why it is complex. And once you understand what the other person is doing, it's very easy to build trust. It's very easy to understand each other and have a good working relationship. So that's something which is across the board. Everyone has to do it. I keep saying this internally that Nuclei is not going to be built by one or two people, right? It's going to be built by the complete team. And that was one of the reasons why we took the decision of diluting 25% of our equity and then keeping it aside as a pool for the team instead of, generally speaking, 10% pool, right? So because we know that it's not something which we alone can achieve. It's a collective effort. Everyone has to work hard. And when everyone is working hard, they need to be rewarded for that. Their skin needs to be in the game. And therefore, over a period of time, whatever value we create needs to get distributed in the team.
Right. 2020 was kind of an outlier year, right? I mean, to say the least. But one of the things that I have been really amazed by is how banks and all of these large institutions have continued to function, right? Without any chaos. At least, I mean, it's not visible to us. How have you seen banks change post 2020? And, how has your interaction with the bank itself been affected by all of this?
It's been difficult for bankers, to say the least. Like I know so many bankers who got impacted with COVID, not just them, right? Because of them, their families also. So it becomes exponentially more difficult to, I can't even think the emotional or the psychology behind it when they start thinking that their family is getting impacted because of their job, right? So the emotional roller coaster you go through is something which is very, very unimaginable. And lot of bankers across the country across the globe have gone through this. It was extremely difficult for them, for the bankers, to work through the pandemic. It's not difficult for all the tech companies. Why? Because they seamlessly went and worked from home. So we worry about small problems as tech companies, but for bankers, it has been an extremely difficult period. From a thought process or from a planning perspective, at least for the first 6 months after the lockdown, since maybe between say March and August, September, a lot of bankers are focused on making sure that everything is running as smoothly as possible because they were also getting disrupted. I know quite a few bank headquarters which were quarantined for 3 weeks or 4 weeks because there were just a lot of cases in the building. And then they had to again restart and make sure that everything is working properly, remotely, etc. But I think over the end of 2020 is when people started thinking, people had started thinking, but also started executing that. Now, the way we know banks operating from a physical infrastructure perspective, that is probably going to change for good. And digital which already was a focus for banks, but now needs to be even more going forward. And that's, I think, is a mindset change which has come across the globe. And to be honest, not just banks. That is true for, I think, across all the industries. That people have now started focusing a lot more on infrastructure, a lot more on digital interfaces, a lot more on digital customer experience. And I think that will only result in making sure that the customer experience becomes a low touch point experience. Every service or product which is being delivered from the bank's perspective becomes more self-service in nature. And also it will require customers also to graduate themselves in a lot of cases from branches to say a mobile banking app or internet banking.
Yeah, everything that Nuclei does has become that much more important right now, given the digital adoption and the fact that IT is not simply an enabler, it's the way to do business.
Correct.
At this point of time. So I want to shift our gaze towards Nuclei as a startup itself, right? I mean, you guys have been in the market for about 3 years. What are some of the high-level challenges that you are solving right now as a founder?
See, different challenges as time progresses, different challenges become the focus. Right now, my core focus is on building the right team. But then going forward, the second focus, and I'm speaking only from a Nuclei's perspective, right? Not from a product perspective or problems our products are solving. So from Nuclei's perspective, just two focus areas right now is first is to build the team. Second is to grow geographically and become horizontal, and also horizontally through multiple industries. So these are the two core focus areas for us for the next 12 odd months. From a client perspective, right? So the problems which our products are solving, and I probably touched upon it before as well. Post the pandemic, the complete relationship between an institution and its customers, whether it is a bank and their customers or a telco and their customers, will shift more away from the physical nature to a digital nature. And query will be that how do we increase our revenue or the lifetime value of a customer over a period of time, and not just from the core services which a bank or a telco offers, but also from other services and products which can be integrated into the system. And that will essentially leverage the distribution of the banks and the telcos and make sure that they are generating more revenue from the same customer. At a broad level, that is our focus, right? We want to help build products for banks and telcos, which helps them increase their revenue per customer or products per customer and make sure that the lifetime value of the customer increases. This is them just leveraging their distribution and increasing their revenue.
Right. So let's speak a little bit about your go-to-market motion, right? You're based out of India, but as I've heard before, you're also selling to banks in Southeast Asia and also Middle East, right? So what is the thought process and, how do you go about it? Can you just take us through a one-on-one?
So again, that is something which we are still figuring out. We have not figured it out completely, but one thing is sure, we realized it over the last year or so is that selling remotely, and specifically when you are selling a high ticket item, right? Selling that remotely is very, very difficult.
It's tough.
So it is tough. So we've been lucky a few times where we have sold high ticket items to institutions without having physically met. But in the last year or so, it was still understood, right? Going forward, now that a lot of people are getting vaccinated, I think it will be faster if we go and be based out of those geographies and physically meet as much as possible or as much as required and build that trust and then sell those items. So whether it is Southeast Asia or Middle East or Europe, right? So we have to be physically present there and sell them. And that's the plan forward as well, that our teams will be based out of, if not all the teams, at least the sales team will be present out of these geographies and selling to banks and telcos.
Right. So as we approach the end of the podcast, I want to know, what are you optimistic for going forward from where you're operating right now, right? Which is selling to banks as a founder of a fintech company. So what are you most optimistic for going forward?
So I'm very, very optimistic about my team to start with, right? So I think we have a good bunch of people we have brought together. We obviously want to add more good people to the team and build a very, very strong team which can build sustainable business, right? So we are not looking to exit the business. That is not the idea with which we even started the business, right? So we are not looking to exit the business. We are looking to make a lot of profit and then grow the business gradually over the next 7-8 years and grow it to a sizable number. From a bank's perspective, I'm very bullish because there is just so much opportunity available for banks to leverage and grow their business across the markets, right? So that's something which I believe on the digital front, they have just scratched the surface. Any country or across the globe, if you look at the users or customers, primarily everyone focuses on digital natives and let's say the millennials, right? But they are also not a single persona. They are also divided into multiple different personas. In India itself, probably you will have 500 different personas, right? Banks may not necessarily focus on, say, top 5 or top 1 percentile of the persona, but the remaining 99% of the persona who are not digital natives, who are yet to onboard, but can add a lot of value to the banks, is something that needs to be targeted and looked at. That's a huge market to go after. And not just India, as I said, like it's across the globe, that's the same scenario, that there are just so many personas who are still not leveraged from a digital perspective. Those are the opportunities which we feel we can help the banks optimize. We feel we can help the banks make their digital interaction or digital interface with the customers more efficient and more rewarding. Just because it's such a huge market where we have just scratched the top till now, I think there is a lot of opportunity, a lot of value to be created for everyone involved.
Right. One thing is for sure, I think banks will look a lot different 5 or 10 years from now, right? I mean, 10 or 15 years back, everyone predicted that fintech will sort of kill banking. We were all, I think, very foolhardy and very optimistic on that front. But they've done a remarkable job of staying relevant, and they've proven why they are Lindy, right? I mean, in some sense, because they've survived for centuries. And I'm really excited for, what these new forms of banking and everything will look like going into the future. One thing is, I can't not ask you this question, right? So if four friends are sitting in a bar or a restaurant and discussing, hey, you know what, we should probably start a restaurant of our own, right? And like most tech janta will have this bright idea anyway, right? So what are one or two things that they have no idea about and they're going to get gobsmacked as soon as they step into the restaurant business?
I will tell you about all our experience, right? Like what we did not think through, what we were surprised with. When you're sitting in a restaurant and eating food, you only look at the cost of goods. So you look at COGS. This is for 5 rupees. They're selling it for 50, 45 rupees margin. Like it's the easiest way to become a millionaire. From the outside, this looks like a very, very savvy business, a very, very interesting business. But people don't understand. I mean, again, like this is before you go deeper into the business model, right? And that's quite honestly true for every business model. So from the outside, every business model looks very easy. It seems that they are minting money without putting in the effort. Specifically in the restaurant's case, when you go deeper, you realize that scaling the business, getting the right location is one, requires extreme luck. Two, is expensive. Okay. That amount is a fixed cost. That's not a variable cost. That's a fixed cost which goes. Running that entity requires a certain number of people. That again is a fixed cost. And that's a fixed cost which goes every month, right? So you have to earn enough to first recover that fixed cost, and only then you start making some money. No business is easy. It seems that restaurants have a lot of margin. That's not true. That's honestly not true. I mean, it might be true for certain outliers, but most of the restaurants, it's not true. And if you look at any nice area in a city, whether it is say Kormangla or whether it is in Delhi or Bombay, where there are a lot of restaurants, observe what has happened in the last 3 years. A lot of restaurants would have opened and shut down. People don't see that. People only look at the survivors and feel that, yeah, this is like these guys are minting money and I will be a survivor. Any business requires perseverance. If anyone has that perseverance, it's not a bad business to do, but it's an extremely difficult business to manage.
Yeah. No, I had a friend of mine, a very good friend, who started up a couple of restaurants, and I've gotten to observe things from very close quarters. And to me, it seems like a numbers business, right? More than a food business, because I mean, you have to have a fair handle of that. And you're right. I mean, there's humongous churn in that business, right? I mean, we only see the ones that have survived, and that's a bit of a bias. So it looks good, but it's a very competitive business. So Ankur, before we bid goodbye, any books and podcasts that you would recommend to our listeners?
Absolutely. Books, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, one of my favorite books. Poor Charlie's Almanac, again, an amazing book to read. Guide to a Good Life, Stoicism. I think that's also a very, very good book. I have personally learned a lot of things in and around Stoicism. Yeah, those three books are, I mean, there are many more, but like these three books I will recommend. From a podcast perspective, I think Invest Like the Best by Patrick O'Shaughnessy. I think that's a good podcast. Yeah. Apart from that, there are quite a few podcast episodes which I like. For example, so we internally also we have decided to, along with our book club, we have also decided to merge it with the podcast club. So we'll pick up a podcast and discuss that, and we'll probably do this, open it up for everyone else, not just keep it internal, right? So next week onwards, I think we are discussing the podcast of Josh Wolf, again in Invest with the Best. And that's a crazy podcast episode, right? So everyone should hear that. Even all the podcasts which Naval Ravikant does, they are also quite amazing. Like he's a modern day philosopher. A lot of things to learn from him, specifically how to lead a good life, right? So that's something which definitely we all can learn. And today being an Independence Day, in fact, I was just going to tweet about this, that I was thinking about freedom, and that's one of the objectives which we internally want to achieve, quite a few people, right? So that freedom to take certain decisions, freedom from doing certain things, and not just from a time perspective, right? Also from a mental space perspective. A lot of times people take decision out of fear, and fear is a very, very strong emotion. So people are obviously afraid of death or afraid of getting hurt, right? So that fear is a very good motivator to do certain things certain way. There is also a fear of missing out.
Right.
So, for example, Nuclei not raising funds is a FOMO for us, right? So it could be a FOMO for us. It could be a fear that everyone else is raising tens of millions of dollars. We are not. And a lot of times, question might come in my mind or in people who are working at Nuclei, their mind that why are we not raising funds? It could again be a fear of missing out. So the trick is in not allowing others to control your emotions. It is in always being in your own control. Extremely easy to say, very, very difficult to do, right? But that's where true freedom is achieved. So if we have most of the things under our control, or at least all the items or all the variables which we can control, if we have those in our control, that's a very good place to be in on an Independence Day. So
yeah, that's a great note to end the podcast on, Ankur. Thank you so much for the insights. I had a great time talking to you, understanding various nuances of how to build and sell for banks. So thank you so much, and look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and absolutely would love to be here again.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, then don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite platform and share this episode with all of your fellow startup operators. Also, follow the Startup Operator on LinkedIn and Twitter for more updates. Stay safe, take care, and see you soon on a brand new episode of the Startup Operator.